Good evening. How's everybody doing? It's great to be with you on a Tuesday night. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us for an excellent page with a colorful story? Yehud in South Carolina, Rose in New Mexico, John in Maine, Nancy in North Carolina, James in Indianapolis, Paula in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Gwen in Michigan, Renee in Indiana, Bill in mid-Missouri, getting ready for another spot of traveling. Hopefully you can catch us while you're on the road. Dawn in Los Angeles, Lucy in Minnesota, Judy in Signal Mountain, Tennessee, John in Surfside Beach. Welcome everybody. Over there on the YouTube side, Yitzhak in Kansas City. It's great to be learning with you on a Tuesday. We are going to be doing page 50 today here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of yibum. We are completing Mishna number 10 of chapter 4, and with it, chapter 4. We're going to be opening chapter 5, which only has one Mishnah in it. We picked this up actually pretty close to the top of page 49b. Left kind of a little extra yesterday since we were doing a highlights show covering, we had to skim so fast to just do highlights from the previous 4 pages, but wanted to save this section from 49b in its entirety, but gives us a bunch to do today, so let's get into it. Okay, so we were talking this Mishnah number 10 about what are the principles that define a mamzer. Basically, if a couple who are prohibited by a prohibition, they're prohibited to be together, to have relations together by a prohibition that bears the kares penalty, death at the hands of the heavenly court, or court-imposed capital punishment, if having sex would violate such a prohibition and yield such a punishment, then the offspring of that union is a mamzer. That's the rabbi's opinion. They overrule Rabbi Akiva, who would have said that a mamzer is the product of any prohibited union, even with a lesser penalty. But the rabbis overruled Rabbi Akiva. The Mishnah also sort of listed out a bunch of cases to illustrate the same principle. Basically, that a man can never marry the sister of his wife even after he and his wife are divorced. He can't marry her sister as long as his wife or ex-wife is alive. Once his wife dies or his yevama dies, then her sister would be permitted to him. So let's get on. Okay, so now we continue with the Gemara on that Mishnah near the top of 49b. The Mishnah states, Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I found a scroll recording people's lineages, and this scroll is brought down because it makes mention of a mamzer, and so they were using it in the definition of a mamzer. But now we're getting a little bit deeper into this scroll. So the Gemara cites an expanded version of the contents of that scroll that Shimon ben Azai found. It is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I found a scroll recording people's lineages in Jerusalem, And it was written in it that so-and-so is a mamzer from an adulterous union with a married woman. And it was also written in it, the teachings of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov measure only a kav, but are clean and accurate. And so the halacha is decided in accordance with his opinion. This Eliezer ben Yaakov doesn't have many rulings, but when you see one in the Talmud, you can rely on it. And it was also written in that scroll, Menashe, king of Israel, killed Isaiah the prophet. Now, this King Menashe, he was quite a piece of work. We've mentioned him a few times. He had one of the longest reigns of a Jewish king, 55 years. The first 22 years, he was utterly wicked. Just brought in all kinds of idolatrous practices. Some say even worship of Moloch, which brought child sacrifice as one of its practices, really desecrated the throne of David with those practices. After 22 years, he was captured by a foreign king, threatened, he prayed for mercy to be saved. He was saved, and then he sought to make teshuvah. And he actually behaved well for the next 33 years of his reign. But he had done so much harm to the kingdom that the sages debate whether the teshuvah, the atonement of those later 33 years, could ever atone for the wickedness of those first 22. Now, the Gemara expands on the events surrounding the death of the prophet Isaiah. Rava said, Menashe judged him as a false witness for issuing statements contradicting the Torah, and only then killed him. I mean, the holy prophet Isaiah to be judged by one like Menashe? Okay, but according to this scroll, he was judged by Menashe. So Menashe said to Isaiah, Moses, your master, said in the Torah, Exodus 33:20, and he, God, said, you cannot see my face, for man cannot see me and live. And yet you said in the book of Isaiah, I saw the Lord sitting upon a high and lofty throne. Now, if Moses, your master, said, for which great nation is there that has God so near to it as the Lord our God is, whenever we call upon him, Deuteronomy 4:7, and yet you said, seek the Lord while he may be found, call upon him while he is near. Isn't he always near to us? How can you say only, seek him when he is near? And no one can see God's face and live, and yet you claim in your book of prophecy that you saw God's face. Right? Seek him while he is near, which implies that God is not always near. And the third contradiction, Moses, your master, said, I will fulfill the number of your days. Exodus 23:26, which implies that every individual has a preordained, allotted lifespan that he cannot outlive. And yet you, Isaiah, said in a prophecy to King Hizkiyahu, and I will add to your days 15 years. That's said in the second book of Kings 20 verse 6. So Isaiah, right, or Yeshayahu Yeshaya in Hebrew. So Yeshaya said to himself, I know him, i.e. Menashe, that he will not accept whatever explanation I give for these apparent contradictions to resolve them. And even if I say to him, I will make him into an intentional transgressor, since he will kill me anyway. And even if I will say it to him, even if I will explain it to him, I will just make him into an intentional transgressor, since he will kill me anyway. Which is interesting. It's like Isaiah cares about Menashe's destiny. It's very interesting, right? Isaiah, let's call him Isaiah, since that's the name so familiar to all of us. That Isaiah cares that Menashe should not become an intentional sinner, right? That Menashe thinks he's executing Isaiah for a reason, that he has cause, because Isaiah is committing heresy by prophesying in a way that contradicts Torah, right? And Isaiah is saying to himself, well, he's going to kill me anyway, so I'm not going to bother to explain to him why he's wrong. Therefore, in a different manner, to try and escape, Isaiah uttered a divine name right, performed a miracle, and he was swallowed within a cedar tree. Menashe's servants brought the cedar tree and sawed through it in order to kill him. And when the saw reached to where Isaiah's mouth was, he died. He died specifically at this point due to that which he said. He prophesied about his own death. In the midst of people of unclean lips, I dwell. Now, he was punished for referring to the Jewish people in this derogatory manner. Interesting, right? So according to the sages, Isaiah's life was cut short because he was sent for the benefit of the Jewish people. And obviously the Jewish people did not listen to the prophecies of Isaiah, and that's why eventually the first temple was destroyed. And he was so frustrated that he knew he was bringing the word of the Lord, telling the people to repent from their wicked and idolatrous ways. They wouldn't listen. And so at a certain point, he made a statement that was, enshrined, as it were, in Scripture, that he called the Jewish people a people of unclean lips. And for this, he was punished and his life was cut short. Now, the Gemara asks, in any case, as Menashe pointed out, these verses do seem to contradict Torah. Right? The Menashe may have been a wicked king who tried to make atonement and may not have been successful, but his accusation against Isaiah seems to have some merit. Now the Gemara will resolve these contradictions. These are the answers that Isaiah could have given Menashe. I saw the Lord. Right? The Torah says no man can see the face of the Lord and live, and Menashe says, I saw the Lord. This is to be understood as it is taught in a Baraisa. All of the prophets observed their prophecies through an obscure looking glass, an aspaclaria, i.e., their prophecies were given as metaphoric visions, but were not a direct perception of the matter. However, Moses, our master, observed his prophecies through a clear looking glass, i.e., he gained a direct and accurate perception of the matter. Right? Moses rose to a level of prophecy that no prophet before or since ever reached. He saw things that no other prophet was ever able to see. So when Isaiah said he saw the Lord, he wasn't saying that he saw him as clearly as Moses or that he saw the Lord's face clearly. He saw something, what was given to him to see. The Gemara resolves the second contradiction of Isaiah's prophecy. Seek the Lord while he may be found. This does not contradict the verse in the Torah that God is near to his nation whenever we call upon him, because this prophecy of Isaiah was made with regard to the individual, and this verse in the Torah is stated with regard to a community, as the prayer of the community is always accepted. Right? When the community gathers to pray, that prayer is always heard. It may not receive the positive answer that the people are looking for, but it is accepted, it is received. The prayer of the individual, there are some times that are more propitious to pray than others. And the Gemara asks, and when is the time that God is to be found near the individual? And Rav Nachman said that Rabba bar Avu said, these are the 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. That's when God is especially near to us. And we also have the teaching that God actually begins that period at the beginning of Elul, the month before. During that whole month, the king is in the field, as it were. God is especially near to the Jewish people, and that is a time to be especially, calling out to God and asking him for help in our atonement and whatever we need help with. The resolution of the third contradiction between the prophecy of Isaiah and the apparent contradiction between Isaiah's prophecy and Torah, I will fulfill the number of your days. This is subject to a dispute between the Tanaim, the rabbis of the Mishna. As it is taught in a Baraisa, the verse states, I will fulfill the number of your days. These are the years of the generations, i.e. the allotted lifespan that is preordained for each individual before birth. If he is deserving, God completes his allotted lifespan. If he is not deserving, God reduces his lifespan. This is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva assumes where am I? Rabbi Akiva assumes that one cannot outlive one's preordained allotted lifespan. But the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva say, if he is deserving, God adds years to his lifespan, and if he is not deserving, God reduces his lifespan. According to the rabbis, Isaiah's prophecy is referring to one who deserved to have extra years added to his allotted lifespan, and the verse in the Torah is referring to one who deserved merely to complete his allotted lifespan. Here we have a note from Rav Steinsaltz on this subject. What is the significance of being given a preordained lifespan if one can merit additional years or lose years based on one's actions? Now, this squares nicely with the idea of kares as a penalty that could reduce one's lifespan. But if we could add or reduce based on our actions in this world, now that doesn't mean that an utterly righteous person will live to 120 years, and anybody who dies younger than that, it's because of wicked deeds, and if they died really young, it's because they did something very wicked at a young age. No, no, no. Everybody has some kind of allotment. They could maybe increase it or reduce it somewhat, but some people are sent into this world with a very, sort of specific mission that will only take a certain number of years. Rav Steinsaltz continues. He says that the Tziach on Yoma 86b, so the Tziach is a commentator, on page 86b of Tractate Yoma, the laws of Yom Kippur, the Tziach suggests that each day has its own unique goals to be fulfilled. And if one did not utilize each day correctly, he will be called to account in the world to come for the time that he wastes. We have a similar teaching from the Lubavitcher Rebbe who says every time we waste a moment, that moment is gone forever. It's wasted forever. It's like you killed that moment. But every time we seize a moment in order to do a good, to perform a mitzvah, that moment lives forever, right? So you come here on a mission. Every day that you're given, that day had a certain goal for your soul to come into this world to perform that. So if you utilize each day correctly, you'll be rewarded for that. And if you waste that day, you'll be held accountable for that when you come before the heavenly throne for judgment, when you leave this world. However, if a person merits it, he will receive additional days. And consequently, he will be able to complete the goals that he did not achieve during the amount of time that had been allotted to him. We all come here on a mission. Hopefully we fulfill it. Maybe we don't, right? Some of us don't. Maybe many of us don't. I don't know what percentage of the souls who come in on a certain, for each of their lifetimes are able to fulfill all the goals of that lifetime. But the more mitzvahs we do, the more we make sure that we align ourselves with God's will, perhaps the more opportunities we will merit, the more days we will even merit in order to fulfill our mission, our soul's mission in this world. Now, the rabbis say that your allotted lifespan can be adjusted up or down. Rabbi Akiva basically says it can only be adjusted down. So the rabbis said to Rabbi Akiva, how can you claim that one cannot outlive one's allotted lifespan when there is a verse that states that Isaiah prophesied to Hezekiah, or Chizkiyahu in Hebrew, as Chizkiyahu lay on his deathbed, and I will add unto your days 15 years. Right? Chizkiyahu was lying on his deathbed, and Isaiah said to him, I will add unto your days 15 years, and he received them. Rabbi Akiva said to them, those additional years that God added to the lifespan of Chizkiyahu, this is the father of Menashe, when that God added to his lifespan, were from his own allotted lifespan. When Chizkiyahu sinned before God, God decreed that his lifespan be shortened. But when he later repented, God allowed him to live out those years. And know that this is so. As a prophet during the reign of King Yevamos, stood and prophesied in 1 Kings 13:2, behold, a son shall be born unto the house of David, and Yoshiahu is his name. Hold on a second. And Yoshiahu is his name. So Yoshiahu, in English we say Josiah, and he would be the grandson of the wicked Menashe, the great-grandson of Chizkiyahu. Right, so this prophet said, behold, a son will be born unto the house of David, and Yoshiahu is his name. And Yoshiahu was the grandson of Menashe, who was the son of Chizkiyahu. And at the time that Chizkiyahu lay on his deathbed, Menashe had not yet been born. Evidently, Chizkiyahu's preordained allotted lifespan had still not been completed. And what would the rabbis respond to Rabbi Akiva's proof? They could counter, well, it is written that Yoshiahu was to be born specifically from, is it written, the rabbis would answer Akiva, is it written that Yoshiahu was to be born specifically from the descendants of Hizkiyahu? It is written only that he would be born unto the house of David. So he could be born either from the descendants of Hizkiyahu or from a different person who was a member of the house of David. Accordingly, no proof concerning Hizkiyahu's allotted lifespan can be deduced from that verse. And the Mishnah details the prohibition, and then that's it. It leaves this subject of the contradictions, apparent contradictions between Isaiah and Torah, and this idea, do we have like an absolute finite lifespan that was given to us before we come into this world? And if we make mistakes, bad mistakes, it'll be shortened. Or do we follow the rabbis who disagree with Akiva, and that lifespan could actually be lengthened? We don't know. And the rabbis disagree, and there's more of them who agree with each other and disagree with Akiva. But really, there's no final answer on this topic. But it would seem that all the sages agree that the more good we do, the less our life would be shortened by our transgressions. And just to round out the chapter, the Mishnah, Mishnah number 10 here of chapter 4, details the prohibition with regard to one's wife's sister in various cases. If a man's wife died, he is permitted to her sister. If his yevama died, then he is permitted to her sister. And Rav Yosef said, here, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, taught an unnecessary Mishnah, since the prohibition with regard to one's wife's sister and the fact that the prohibition exists only in the lifetime of one's wife is stated explicitly in the Torah, and there is no additional novelty in this Mishnah's ruling. We could have known it from the Torah. And that concludes chapter 4. We now enter chapter 5. Chapter 5 only has one Mishnah in it, and we're going to explore what actions a yavam can take toward his yevama, what legal actions, and what the consequences of that are. We've talked about it a lot, right? A man dies, he was married but childless, he leaves a widow and a brother. The brother has an obligation to either perform yibum, levirate marriage, with his yevama, or chalitzah, the alternative mitzvah, the alternative ceremony, in which they opt not to marry and produce children for the brother who died, an heir for the brother who died, just the first child, but rather they perform this ceremony, chalitzah, and then she's free to go her separate ways and marry whoever she wants, and he has no further obligation to her nor to his brother's estate. That is by Torah law. And then we've also mentioned that there's this concept of levirate betrothal, right? So betrothal is the first step in Jewish marriage. These days, both the betrothal and the wedding itself are performed on the same day. But in ancient times, they would betroth, which was a form of it, like what we would think of as an engagement, except that once a couple is betrothed, they are prohibited to other people. They are considered married, even though they haven't consummated that union. They haven't stood under the chuppah. They haven't had sexual relations. Nevertheless, they're considered married. And if they want to break off the betrothal, then a bill of divorce must be given. A yavam and a yevama should not then enter a betrothal, sort of agree to get married, because it's unnecessary. All they need to do is sleep together, and then they're married according to the law of yibum. But by rabbinic law, they do have this option, or it's almost like if they did it it's ill-advised, but if they did it, they said, okay, we're going to get married, then there's a levirate betrothal, and that's a further obligation to each other. If they decide they're going to go their separate ways by performing chalitzah, he also has to give her a get, a bill of divorce, to undo the bond of the levirate betrothal. So those are the legal options, and now we're going to explore that in a little bit greater detail. Mishnah number 1, the only Mishnah here of chapter 5. We're near the bottom of page 50a. Rabban Gamliel says, a bill of divorce, a get, is not effective when given after a bill of divorce was previously given to a yevama. Well, if you gave her a bill of divorce, first of all, you'd only do that because you first betrothed her. Then you gave her a bill of divorce. Now you've undone the betrothal. Why would you give another get? Once a yevama receives a bill of divorce from a yavam, no bill of divorce given by that yavam to her co-wife, i.e. her rival wife, or a bill of divorce given to her by a different yavam. There might have been multiple brothers, but once one brother gives that yavama a get, no other brother needs to or can give her a get. It won't have any effect. And levirate betrothal is not effective after a previous levirate betrothal was performed. And intercourse with a second yevama is not effective after intercourse with the first one. If the brother who died had 2 wives, right? If one of his brothers performs yibum with one of those wives, so then he's married to her. Her co-wife is exempt, as we've seen. So if one of the brothers then slept with the co-wife, or if that same yavam slept with the co-wife, that would only be a sin. That would be a transgression of you shall not be with your brother's wife. Because the law of yibum is you shall build up your brother's house, singular. You perform yibum with only one yavam and one yavam. And if there are other brothers and other co-wives, they just become exempt at that moment. Right? So intercourse with a second yavam is not effective after intercourse with the first one. And chalitzah is not effective after chalitzah was previously performed. But the rabbis say a bill of divorce is effective when given after a bill of divorce. And levirate betrothal is effective after levirate betrothal. But nothing is effective after intercourse or chalitzah. So they actually overrule Rabban Gamliel. And they say, well, after one yibum is performed, that's it, everyone else exempt. Or one chalitzah is performed, everyone else exempt. But because this levirate betrothal is this weird gray area of rabbinic law, if there was a second levirate betrothal, let's say one yavam, right, one surviving brother and one of the widows performed the levirate betrothal, and then let's say another brother performed the levirate betrothal with a different one of her co-wives afterward, Rabban Gamliel would say that doesn't take any effect. It's meaningless. But the rabbis say, no, not quite. You performed the betrothal. You shouldn't have done it. You did. The law becomes unclear. And to be safe, you'd have to give that woman a get. If a yavam has relations with the yevama or performs chalitzah with her, no other action performed afterward is effective, whether performed by that yavam toward a different yavama or by any yavam with the original yavam. Now the Mishnah elaborates, how do these laws work in practice? If a yavam performed levirate betrothal with his yavama, and he later gave her a bill of divorce, she nevertheless requires chalitzah. Chalitzah is what she needed to break the levirate bond with him. They did this levirate betrothal and then a get. That was a mistake, but they did it. Okay, once you give a betrothal, to undo it, you're going to need the get. But to break your bond with the yevama, you need chalitzah, and you still need that chalitzah even if a get was given. And the bill of divorce does not fully exempt her from levirate marriage, as the levirate bond remains intact. If he performed levirate betrothal and then chalitzah, then she still requires the get, the bill of divorce from him in order to cancel the levirate betrothal. If the yavam performed levirate betrothal and then he engaged in intercourse with the yavama, this is the way to perform levirate marriage in accordance with its mitzvah, as the sages instituted this as the proper procedure for a yavam to perform levirate marriage. Whoa! I thought levirate betrothal was always a bad idea and unnecessary, but now they're saying, well, If you're going to perform yibum, you might as well make this betrothal first. That was a surprise to me. What is the law? If he performed levirate betrothal and we're still here. So if the performed levirate betrothal and then engaged in intercourse with the yevama, this is the way to perform levirate marriage in accordance with its mitzvah as the sages instituted. Let's keep reading the Mishnah. It's a lengthy Mishnah. If the yavam gave the yevama a bill of divorce and afterward performed levirate betrothal with her, now she requires another bill of divorce to cancel the levirate betrothal as well as chalitzah to nullify the levirate bond. If he gave her a bill of divorce and then engaged in intercourse with her, she requires a bill of divorce to cancel the betrothal that took place via intercourse and chalitzah to nullify the levirate bond. The intercourse did not affect the levirate bond because once he gave her a bill of divorce, she became forbidden to him. If he gave her a bill of divorce and performed chalitzah, nothing is effective after chalitzah as the levirate bond was completely nullified. Similarly, if he performed chalitzah with her and then either performed levirate betrothal or gave a bill of divorce or engaged in intercourse with her, alternatively, if he engaged in intercourse with her and then performed levirate betrothal or gave a bill of divorce or performed chalitzah after they engaged in relations, nothing is effective after the chalitzah or the intercourse. Any action performed afterward is unrelated to the levirate bond. That's why ideally you either do yibum or you do chalitzah and then you're done and there's no confusion. So the above principles apply both in cases of one yevama to one yavam, as well as in cases of two yevamos to one yavam. There were two co-wives and one surviving brother. How so? If he performed a levirate betrothal with this yevama and levirate betrothal with that one, i.e. her rival wife, so now they require two bills of divorce, each for her own levirate betrothal, and then chalitzah with one of them, which would then release both of them from the levirate bond. If he performed levirate betrothal with this one and gave a bill of divorce to that one, the first woman requires a bill of divorce to cancel the levirate betrothal, and one of them must still receive chalitzah. If he performed levirate betrothal with this one and he engaged in intercourse with that one, they require two bills of divorce, and he must perform chalitzah with one of them. If the yavam performed levirate betrothal with this one and performed chalitzah with that one, the first woman requires a bill of divorce, and then they're done. If the yavam gave a bill of divorce to this yevama and a bill of divorce to that one, they require chalitzah from him. I guess both. If he gave a bill of divorce to this one and he engaged in intercourse with that one, the latter requires a bill of divorce and chalitzah. If he gave a bill of divorce to this one and he performed levirate betrothal with that one, the latter requires a bill of divorce and he must perform chalitzah with one of them. If the yavam gave a bill of divorce to this woman and he performed chalitzah with that one, nothing is effective after chalitzah and he cannot betroth the co-wife. If he performed chalitzah with one yevama and then he performed chalitzah with the second yevama, or he performed chalitzah with one yevama and then proceeded to either perform levirate betrothal or give a bill of divorce or give intercourse with the second. Alternatively, he engaged in intercourse with one yevama and then he engaged in intercourse with the second yevama, or he engaged in intercourse with one yevama and then proceeded to either perform levirate betrothal, give a bill of divorce, or perform chalitzah with the second. Nothing is effective after the chalitzah or intercourse with the first one. Everything else has no legal effect except that it's a transgression if they had sex. These laws apply both in cases of one yavam to two yevamos, as well as two yevamim to one yevama, right? Two surviving brothers to the one widow. If he performed chalitzah with one yevama and then proceeded to either perform levirate betrothal, give a bill of divorce, or engage in intercourse with a second yevama, alternatively, he engaged in intercourse with one yevama and then proceeded to perform levirate betrothal or give a bill of divorce or perform chalitzah with a second yevama, nothing is effective after the chalitzah, whether the chalitzah took place at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end. All these halachas accord with the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, who maintains betrothal does not take effect on a woman who is forbidden due to the prohibition against betrothing a yevama after you've performed chalitzah with her. But with regard to intercourse, when it is at the beginning, i.e. the first act that the yavam performed with his yevama, so nothing is effective after it. They've performed yibum, they're now married. And any subsequent action is void. However, if it was performed in the middle, and similarly if it was performed at the end, i.e. after some other action that impairs the validity of his intercourse, something is effective after it, right? So if he performed chalitzah with one, and then performed intercourse with the other, so that intercourse is not a marriage, it's a sin, because he already exempted them with the chalitzah. But if he then performed a betrothal after the intercourse that came after chalitzah, then we have issues. Rabbi Nehemiah says, both with regard to intercourse and chalitzah, whether performed at the beginning, in the middle, or at the end, nothing is effective after it. If the yavam performed a valid action according to Torah law, any subsequent action is of no consequence according to halacha. That's the Mishna. Pretty straightforward, right? Let's keep reading the Gemara. Rabban Gamliel and the rabbis disagree only with regard to the efficacy of a bill of divorce performed after a bill of divorce and levirate betrothal performed after levirate betrothal. But one bill of divorce given to a single yevama or one levirate betrothal performed with a single yevama is effective. The bill of divorce prevents him from performing levirate marriage, and the levirate betrothal requires a bill of divorce to cancel it in addition to chalitzah. I mean, this is pretty interesting, that what they were supposed to do is perform either yibum or chalitzah. Instead, they were confused, they made a mistake, and he said, I'm not going to marry you. I know I have a bond with you, so here's a get. I'm giving you a bill of divorce. Now that should have no effectiveness. The choices according to Torah are yibum or chalitzah. He gave her a bill of divorce. According to Rabban Gamliel, after he gives her a bill of divorce, he may not perform yibum with her, but he should perform chalitzah. The Gemara elaborates. What is the reason that the sages said that a bill of divorce is effective for a yevama, despite the fact, so it's the sages who said this. What is the reason that the sages said that a bill of divorce is effective for the yevama, despite the fact that she is not his wife? She has a levirate bond with him, but she is not his wife, right? She stands before him to perform either chalitzah or yibum. How can giving this woman a get to whom he is not married, he has some kind of obligation, but it's not marriage, how could a bill of divorce, a get, have some kind of validity? This is because it is effective in general in cases of married women. For if you say that it is not effective in the case of a yevama, there are some who might mistakenly say the following. A bill of divorce is given to a woman in order to remove her from her husband. And chalitzah likewise serves to remove her from the yavam. Since a bill of divorce is ineffective for this yevama, chalitzah is also ineffective and does not sever their relationship completely. And perhaps the yavam will come to engage in intercourse after chalitzah, which is forbidden by the Torah prohibition derived from the verse. So shall it be done to the man who does not build his brother's house. After you perform chalitzah, now she's prohibited to you. You cannot marry her. That's it. You had your chance. You could have performed yibum with her. You didn't. You perform chalitzah instead. Now she's prohibited to you. And what is the reason that the sages said that levirate betrothal is effective for a yevama? So you see, like, why does the get have some kind of validity? Why does betrothal have some kind of validity in a situation where they shouldn't have validity? The sages said, well, we need to give them some kind of a validity because if people make this mistake, it could lead them to make other mistakes and multiply their transgressions. So it's a policy reason that they make this rabbinic decree. So what is the reason that the sages said that a levirate betrothal is effective for a yevama? Because it is effective in general. As levirate betrothal is essentially an act of betrothal, and betrothal is generally effective. For if you say that levirate betrothal is not effective, there are some who might mistakenly say levirate betrothal serves to acquire a woman as a wife, and intercourse serves to acquire a woman in general. According to Jewish law, if two, single Jews have sex, they're married. Right? They're married at that moment. Levirate betrothal serves to acquire a woman, and intercourse serves to acquire a woman in general, as women can be betrothed by intercourse. Since levirate betrothal is ineffective in the case of a yevama, intercourse is also ineffective, i.e. it does not acquire a yevama completely, and he will therefore come to engage in intercourse with a rival wife after intercourse with the first yevama, because he doesn't understand the law. And what is the reason the sages who disagree with Rabbi Nehemiah said that invalid intercourse, i.e. intercourse that follows a disqualifying action with the rival wife of a yevama, does not fully acquire the yevama, such that something is effective after it. In this, like a bill of divorce. In this case, the invalid intercourse does not cancel the levirate bond, and therefore further action with the yevama is effective, like chalitzah or a bill of divorce. So the sages say, if this intercourse performed after a bill of divorce, if this is intercourse performed after a bill of divorce, then it is considered invalid due to a rabbinic decree with regard to intercourse that happens after a bill of divorce, because of its potential confusion with a case of intercourse after chalitzah. And the sages established that invalid intercourse of this kind should not cancel the levirate bond completely, for if it did, then people might come to engage in intercourse after chalitzah, which would violate a Torah prohibition. And if this is intercourse performed after levirate betrothal, then it is considered invalid due to a rabbinic decree with regard to intercourse after levirate betrothal, because of its potential confusion with a case of intercourse with the second yevama, they were co-wives, after intercourse with the first. If intercourse after levirate betrothal is effective, people might come to engage in intercourse with the second yevama after intercourse with the first, and this is forbidden, as the woman is considered his brother's wife who is not eligible for yibum. And I'm almost done, so if you have questions or comments, get them in. And what is the reason the sages said with regard to this invalid chalitzah, that nothing is effective after it? For they say, what is the reason that we should issue a decree in that case? Should we issue a decree with regard to chalitzah performed after a bill of divorce due to a concern for chalitzah performed after chalitzah? In this case, there is no concern, as there is no prohibition involved in repeating chalitzah. The second chalitzah is just meaningless. In any situation like these, let her continue performing chalitzah, for no harm is done if chalitzah is performed unnecessarily. Alternatively, should we issue a decree stating that other actions are effective after chalitzah is performed, after levirate betrothal, due to the concern for confusion with the case of chalitzah performed after intercourse? In this case, there is a concern that people will assume that no bill of divorce is required after intercourse so long as the yavam perform chalitzah. The Gemara challenges this concern, is that to say that in the case of chalitzah, after levirate betrothal, she does not require a bill of divorce for his levirate betrothal, such that one would conclude the same for chalitzah after intercourse. In the case of chalitzah, after levirate betrothal, the woman requires the get because of the betrothal. And similarly, in the case of chalitzah, after intercourse, she likewise requires a bill of divorce because of the intercourse, which acts like a betrothal. Thus, the same action performed following chalitzah after levirate betrothal is also performed following chalitzah after intercourse, and therefore there is no need to issue a further decree. So you see, the sages will issue decrees to protect people from coming to violate predictable prohibition. From coming to make predictable errors, which would lead them to violate laws and come to, commit a sin. But if it's unlikely to happen, or if it really doesn't create a transgression, then they're going to be reluctant, even though it might clarify things or cover every base. they're showing a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? They don't want to issue too many decrees unnecessarily, right? A reluctance to over-legislate, as it were. All right, let's go to comments and questions. On Yevamos 50. Tom, the tradition wants us to gather together to pray on the behalf of our community, but we are also taught that no prayer service is complete without individual petitions. Very good. So we're going back to this idea that there seemed to be an apparent contradiction between Isaiah's prophecy and Torah, where Isaiah said, pray to God when he is near, and Moses said, the God of Israel is always near to his nation. And how did they resolve that? There's a difference between near to individuals and near to a community. When a community gathers to pray, that prayer has more power to be heard in heaven than the prayer of an individual. However, God always welcomes our prayer. And we have a saying elsewhere that the gate of tears is never shut, right? So one who prays from like the innermost recesses of his heart, an emotional, heartfelt prayer that brings one to tears, that is always heard in heaven. And as Tom reminds us, that no prayer service, no communal prayer service is ever complete, right, if the individuals participating in it don't add personal prayers, right? That is taught to us that when we pray the Amida, right, the prayer always means the standing prayer, or the Shemona Esrei, another name for it, the 18 blessings. But the central prayers of every prayer service, morning, afternoon, and evening, is the Amidah. And when we pray it, we should always, somewhere during that prayer, and there's some sections of it that are better than others, add our personal prayers, right? It's particularly that says you are a God who hears prayer. That is a good place to add personal prayers. Also, the section where God is blessed for being a healer, good place to ask for the healing of people we love and who are ill. Charles, it is interesting that Menashe killed the prophet Isaiah, who was the son of the prophet's daughter, who was given to King Chizkiyahu to marry. Chizkiyahu had prophetically known his son would be wicked. Correct. He was told his son would be wicked, and unfortunately his grandson as well. Menashe was terribly wicked, at least made an atonement. His son Ammon, I think, was just all wicked. But the grandson, Yoshiahu, he was an utterly righteous king. Lisuik and Eugenia, are there any levirate marriages in this day of age? And the basic answer to that, it's interesting, the law was never sort of finalized to say that we don't perform yibum anymore. It is definitely preferable not to, and in practice, it basically never happens, right? And one of the reasons given is that if a brother steps in to marry his widow, if there's any feeling like they're attracted to each other, that actually is a problem, because they can only marry each other for the purpose of giving the brother who died without an heir that he should have an heir. But in that situation where, tragically a young man dies who's married, hasn't had children, and leaves a surviving brother, they do perform chalitzah. So chalitzah is still practiced today, the alternative mitzvah, and definitely the preferred one. My research showed, I looked this up some weeks ago, that that no one can find the case of yibum like in the last 100 years. But 100 years is not that long. That's very recent history compared to the 3,500 years of Jewish history. So there were some cases of yibum, even a century ago or more. But even that was super rare. In the last couple thousand years, hardly ever was there yibum. And finally, Yosef, marriage then was a two-step process, betrothal and nisuin. Was sex permitted during the betrothal process? No, right? The idea was that you would not do that until you stood under the chuppah, and if you did, then you affected nisuin, right? It's like you skipped forward because bia, right? That's the Hebrew word for sex. Is a form of consummating the marriage. In other words, you went from betrothal to marriage, right? And so, you ended the betrothal period when you had sex, but it is definitely not what they were looking for, right? The idea was that there would be a wedding celebration, which is, one of the most joyful things in the Jewish tradition. And you don't want to short circuit that by having premarital sex. I mean, according to Jewish law. Okay, my friends, that is what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll continue on page 51 and our exploration of this single Mishnah of chapter 5 tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific.